I will.
That did it. Thanks, Kim.
You're welcome. And yes, I'm actually.
No, I'm still at the California Council of Social Studies Conference. We start at 8:30. So, I mean, 8:30 California time. So I'm happy my camera doesn't work. You don't want to see what I look like at 6:30 in the morning. No way.
You don't just pop out of bed all beautiful? Thought everybody did that.
I never look beautiful anyway, but I look worse than beautiful.
Good morning, John.
Oh, good morning.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started right at 9:30 so that we pay careful attention to time all the way through. I know people are still coming in, but we want to give Cindy her full time to talk about cultivating master teachers and her programming. So Cindy, take it over.
Thanks, Kim. So my name is Cindy Harter. Excuse me. I'm the Center Director at Eastern Kentucky University, which is in Richmond, Kentucky, which is about a half-hour south of Lexington, Kentucky. And I am an associate professor of economics, although I just got a letter from my provost this past week promoting me to full professor. So next year I'll be able to say that I'm a full professor. But anyway, I really appreciate being here to talk about this today. I want to thank Selena Schwartzfeger for bringing this study that I did for the Mississippi Council on Economic Education to the attention of the program committee. And I appreciate the program committee and also Kim Holder for giving me this opportunity to share about this project. So the session objectives are to describe the master teacher program model. And I'm not going to spend the whole time describing the master teacher program model because a lot of the work I did with respect to the Mississippi program was about program evaluation. So I'm going to share results from the program evaluation I did of their program and then discuss some recommendations that came out of that program evaluation. And so I really hope that you'll see it as a general presentation that you could apply to other types of programs, even if you don't do a master teacher program. Feedback is welcome. I have my email address there. It's just my name, cynthia.harter@eku.edu. So what is a master teacher? There are different ways of defining this program. All of them involve teaching teachers to master the basic content and master teaching the content. And a lot of times the teachers that are in the master teacher program are the kind of teachers that go above and beyond. They're not just, there to read something out loud to students. They're really trying to create these experiences of learning. And then a lot of the master teacher programs that I read about have this extra component where you're sharing knowledge with the broader learning community. So you become part of a network or a cadre of teachers that collaborate and become presenters. So some organizations refer to these kinds of programs as train the trainer because you're training teachers to become teacher trainers. So I would be curious to know how many of you use something like this model. So in general, not thinking of every single thing that you do in terms of teacher training in your organization, do you provide mostly programs that teach the content, mostly programs that teach the content with pedagogy, or mostly programs that teach the content, pedagogy, and the training of trainers? I'm just curious to see. I see a lot of twos, which is what I would expect. That's what most of us are doing. Yeah, so there's a few threes. Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks. Okay, so I sent out a survey to NAEE chat and said, I'm going to be presenting this presentation about the master teacher program, and I wanted to know what people are doing. And Colleen Gray from Minnesota Council on Economic Education, if I had a bag of waffles, I would send it to you because you were the only person that responded to my survey. I really appreciate all of the information that you provided, Colleen. And of course, Selena did not respond to the survey because she and I had a Zoom meeting and I had talked to her a lot about the Mississippi program. So I would also send you a bag of waffles too, Selena. But this is just the results from the survey. I said that I would share the results in the session. So I asked, what subjects do you offer in terms of your master teacher program? And in Minnesota, they have master teachers of economics, personal finance or financial literacy, and entrepreneurship. And then Mississippi has all of those, plus a master teacher in college and career readiness. And in Minnesota, they do use the train the trainers model because they have a small staff. And so they recruit teachers from around the state to become part of this master teacher corps. And they do teach them to lead professional development. In Mississippi, my understanding, and you can correct me, Selena, if this is not correct, but did you start the master teacher program because there was this mandate to offer a college and career readiness class?
Well, we started, the econ one was first, and we started that because there was a mandate to teach economics. And then the others, personal finance was just because we thought it was important. Entrepreneurship, we thought it was important. College and career readiness, there is a mandate to teach that class. So that's the newest. Yeah.
And yours is not a train the trainers program, right?
No, it really isn't. Our goal is to make them very good at what they do in the classroom. And then, as I've mentioned in the chat, the best of the best we do hire to train on our behalf, but that is not the goal of the program.
Okay. All right. So average attendance over the past 5 years, Colleen said about 450 teachers. And then I would say probably about that same number in Mississippi if you put all those programs together.
At least that many.
Yeah. So benefits to the teachers, they were similar for the two programs, the continuing ed units, and sometimes stipends or gift cards. Also in Mississippi, for some of your master teacher programs, they can add an endorsement to their teaching license because
All
the
of
Mississippi
them.
Council. Oh, all of them. Okay.
Mhm.
Because you guys have a great relationship with the Mississippi Department of Education and work that out with the Department of Ed. And then funding, state funding, grants, individual donors. That's how you have to be able to fund stipends and those kinds of incentives for teachers. Definitely the two that I spoke with or read about said, yes, this is a good program. And Colleen said, if you don't have the capacity to offer all of the professional development that's needed in your state, then it is a good way to expand the council's reach. So I will say both of these states have really good information available online. If you go to their website, you can get a lot of information about their application process and just how their program is set up. So I recommend that. Okay, so how do we know if the model works? And that's where, excuse me, program evaluation comes in. So why would you do program evaluation? And these next two slides are summaries of some information that Andrew Hill and I presented at the NAEE Fall Conference. I think it was 2018. We did a session on program evaluation. And so this just kind of summarizes some of the things that you can get out of program evaluation. And I'm going to come back to this slide at the end of the presentation to see what pieces of this we got out of the program evaluation for the Mississippi Council's program. So you can measure how the teacher training impacts student learning if you test the students, teacher learning if you're testing the teachers success in teaching the content. Now this one's a little bit trickier because you have to have a group of teachers that are not going through the training program, and you have to have a comparison group that you can compare the master teachers with. So it's a little more involved to set up this kind of program evaluation. And then you can also gather information about the teacher's experience with the program or the curriculum. You can, gather some survey information. The results can help you decide how to effectively use your resources. You can allocate more of your resources toward programs that work, that show results that are positive. And then you have a lot of evidence of effective outcomes from a program evaluation, and you can use that in reporting to donors or potential donors or grant applications. A lot of times grant applications require a lot of information about what you've been doing. You can find collaborators by sharing information about your programs, and then you can use it to advertise and attract participants. And you can send it to educational leaders, to the Department of Education or superintendents or principals, to say, hey, we have these great programs that have done these things for teachers, and help you build up some participation in the programs as well. So how do you get started? If you want to do program evaluation and you've never done any of it, you can start with just figuring out what are some answers that you want to know. If you want to put some information together for a grant application, or if you're working on some advertising, you figure out what is the information that we need. And then you want to think of answers that will lead to actions, because you want your information to be useful. You want it to be able to lead to changes that can be improvements for your organization. So what do you want to know? Why do you want to know it? Sometimes funders will request specific information. I know that in Kentucky, a lot of the folks that I deal with want to know what percentage of the teachers and students are low income. So those are the kinds of things that you have to build in a way to collect that information so that you can share it with your funders or in grant applications. You can take a look at your mission, see what you're trying to accomplish with your mission, and figure out what's going to help me tell the story of what we do. And that will give you some insight into what to ask. But you want some evidence that is convincing. And then you take your questions or your answers that you're seeking and turn them into questions on a short survey. And I bolded the words short survey because that's part of really creating a good program evaluation. You want just the right length of survey to collect the really important information without asking every single thing that you would want to know, because as you know, I'm sure people get tired of answering survey questions. And if it gets too long, sometimes they say, I'm done before they get to the end of it. So you want to really be targeted about what you put on the survey. If you're looking to come up with a program evaluation that could become published research, then that adds a whole additional set of procedures that you need to implement. So you have to use assessments that were created for research purposes. They have to meet certain statistical requirements. They have to be valid and reliable. And then you have to use research procedures. So it does become a lot more complicated if you are thinking, I want to end up with a report that could become a peer-reviewed journal article. So this was a list of tests that Andrew and I presented back when we did the whole session on program evaluation. But these are tests that are readily available, and you can see that there are tests for all different grade levels, starting with upper elementary. And so we have personal finance tests and economics tests. So for the Mississippi program, I worked with the Fed to develop the program evaluation, the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. And I probably should have said at the beginning of this that anything that I say represents my own views and not those of the St. Louis Fed. I don't work for the St. Louis Fed, but I did do this program evaluation through the St. Louis Fed. So I'm speaking for myself and not for the Fed. But anyway, the test that we used was the test of financial literacy, this high school level personal finance test for the assessment. Okay, so just an overview of the Mississippi program evaluation. The training itself was the Mississippi Master Teacher of Personal Finance program, and I was involved when they were running the program from 2018 to 2020. I know that they're still doing it, but the program evaluation was during this period. So they were using this Mississippi personal finance curriculum that was created by the St. Louis Fed, and it was aligned with the national standards for financial literacy. Now, at that time, we were using the 2013 national standards. We now have a new set of national standards where the Council for Economic Education and Jumpstart combined their standards into one set. But for this program, we're using the 2013 standards. So the teachers were tested and the students were tested using the same assessment, the test of financial literacy. And that test is also aligned with the same standards that the curriculum was aligned to. So the teacher responsibilities were to attend a 5-day summer training. They took the test of financial literacy, as a pre-test right at the beginning of the 5-day training. And then they took it as a post-test at the end of the training. And they also answered some demographic questions so that we could look at this from a research point of view and control for some different demographics with the teachers. Then during the following school year, they taught the students the curriculum. And they pre and post tested the students with the same test, the test of financial literacy. Also, we asked the students some demographic questions. And then at the very end, after they finished teaching the curriculum and post testing their students, we asked the teachers to complete a follow-up survey because we wanted to know how many lessons did you use? How much time did you spend on this? Did you like the curriculum? Would you use it again? So we wanted to get some of that follow-up information from teachers after they finished teaching the curriculum. So there were 71 teachers over the 2 summers that attended the training. And then out of those 71, we had 34 teachers who completed all of these steps. There were 567 students of those 34 teachers that had matched scores. Now, first of all, if you think about that time period, the pandemic happened in spring. It first became known to us in the spring of 2020. So that sort of threw a wrench in some of the teachers' plans who were doing this in the spring of 2020. So we lost some because of that. Some teachers will attend the training and then they might get reassigned to teach something else. And so they end up not being able to do the actual student testing part. There were some teachers who pre-tested their students, but then they didn't post-test the students. There were a couple of teachers who did everything except the follow-up survey. And so, you know, it's really hard when you're trying to do this kind of research project to get other people to do what you want them to do. Isn't that the problem in life, right? People don't do what we want them to do. But then after we get the teachers to do what we want them to do, for the students, when they were taking their pre and post test, they used a Mississippi student ID number. They had to put their Mississippi student ID number in for the pre-test and then put it again for the post test. So if they leave out a digit, or if they say, I don't know my Mississippi student ID number, or they put in some nonsense numbers or any of those sorts of things, then we can't match up the pre and post scores. So we can't use it for the program evaluation. So there are a lot of pieces in this particular slide that it's really nice to have someone who's checking up and encouraging teachers to keep going with the pre-test and the post-test and the follow-up survey and all of those pieces. So having the St. Louis Fed working on this and the Mississippi Council working on this was really useful in terms of getting this information. And I know that Jeanette Bennett was instrumental in leading the 5-day summer training as well. So even though I'm presenting this, there are a lot of people probably on this at this conference right now who were involved in this project. So I really appreciate the team and I appreciate the great data that they were able to collect. Okay, so the research question, if we look at assessment results differently, can we identify what works? So that's what I wanted to do when I was looking at the assessment results, because I thought if we can disaggregate the data, maybe it can give us some insight into how to better allocate scarce resources for financial education. And this is just the information about the article I published from this project. It's in the journal Citizenship, Social and Economics Education. If anybody wants any information about that, let me know, but I just put all of the citation information there. Okay, so the 2013 national standards +1, that's what was covered in the Mississippi program. And as I mentioned earlier, the St. Louis Fed created the syllabus, the curriculum for the program, and Mary Suter was critical in that piece of putting this together as well. And one of the things that the St. Louis Fed built into the curriculum was to add this first standard on decision making, because as a lot of us feel, personal finance is really an application of economics. And so when you're looking just at personal finance standards, it's important to have the underpinning of economics and this decision making as what students really need to learn. And then these extra pieces of specific personal finance education can be added to that. So there was this additional standard, and then the 6 standards that are part of the 2013 national standards on personal finance. So we have decision making, earning income, buying goods and services, saving, using credit, financial investing, and protecting and insuring. So if you look at these standards, which standard would you say teachers might know the least about? And you can put your answer in the chat.
Investing, it could be investing or it could be insuring, but I'm thinking investing.
Okay, investing, protecting, insuring. All right, so let's look at some, everybody's pretty clear on that. Financial investing and protecting and insuring. Okay, we know our teachers. All right, so let's look at the results. We'll look first at the teacher results. So here I have the first set of bars are overall. Okay, so the light blue is the pre-test results, and then the dark blue are post-test results. And this is on a scale of 0 to 100. So you can see the teachers did know a lot. They had an 80% on the pre-test, and then almost a 90% on the post-test overall. So then I broke it down into the 7 standards, and you can see the ones that they knew a lot about are here in the middle. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, I don't know, decision making was one where they had lower scores, this economics component, and that really tells us that that's an important part of teacher training. We really need to build that in to make sure teachers have that sound understanding of the economics fundamentals as they start teaching personal finance. You guys in the chat were right about the investing and insuring. That's also some of the lower scores over here on the right side. So they knew a lot. The teachers did know a lot, but then they learned something about every standard in the 5-day training. The post-test went up. And the Mississippi Council has a requirement that you have to score at least 80% on the post-test. You can take it multiple times, but I only used the results from the first time teachers took it. But having that 80% criteria, that requirement, might actually give them some incentive to really try to do well on that post-test, and they did. Okay, so I'm going to use this term statistical significance. If you don't do a lot of research or read a lot of research, I wanted to tell you exactly what that means. If a result is statistically significant, we have confidence that the outcome is not due merely to chance. So it tells us that there's probably something there. We could say that the training did help if the results from the pre-test to the post-test, for example, are statistically significant. So I put a quote here from Tom Redman, author of Data Driven Profiting from Your Most Important Business Asset, describing how statistical significance helps us quantify whether a result is likely due to chance or to some factor of interest. So when a finding is significant, it means you have some confidence that it is real. So that's what I'm going to be showing you, which of the results were statistically significant. Okay, so these are the teacher results in numbers. I showed you the bars, and these are the actual numbers showing you the pre-test average for all of the standards plus the overall down here at the bottom, and then the post-test average, and then you can see the gain here. So if the gain has a bunch of stars, that means it's statistically significant. The more stars, the more statistically significant it is. So the only one that's not statistically significant is number 3 here, which is buying goods and services. And that's not surprising, because that's what we do on a daily basis. We probably know the most about that standard. So they had a really high pretest score on it. They raised the average for the post-test a little bit, but it's not statistically significant. It could have just been due to chance. But for every other standard, they did increase in a statistically significant way. The problems that were identified in terms of the lowest average was on this decision-making standard. There was a statistically significant gain, but it's still a pretty low post-test average compared to others. And also the financial investing, and I can't see the bottom of my screen. I can't see was number 7, did I highlight number 7 also? Or was it
No,
just?
it's not
okay,
highlighted.
Okay, all right. So these are the 2 that we're going to come back to and see what was going on with those 2 standards. Okay, so what I did was disaggregate the results, and basically I took the pre-test and post-test results and divided them into these 4 categories. And this procedure was described by Saunders and Powers in an American Economic Review article from 1995. And then I know about it because Wallstead and Wagner presented a paper that they did. It was published in Journal of Economic Education in 2016. And I heard their presentation at a conference and thought, I'm going to use that at some point. And so here was my opportunity. So if the teachers answered correctly on the pre-test and the post-test, we say that's retained learning. You knew it at the beginning, and then you also knew it at the end. Positive learning, you didn't know it at the beginning. You answered correctly on the pre-test, incorrectly on the pre-test, but correctly on the post-test. So that's positive learning. Negative learning is the opposite. You answered correctly on the pre-test, but not on the post-test. And then the zero learning, you answered incorrectly on both the pre-test and the post-test. Incorrectly on the pre-test and the post-test, that's zero learning. So here are the 34 teachers, and I broke up the retained learning is the light blue, the positive learning is the dark blue, the zero learning is white, and then the negative learning is black. So you can see all this retained learning. Okay, there was a lot for a lot of the teachers. There's this teacher here in the middle who didn't have a lot of retained learning, but look at this big peak of positive learning. So that's great. And the same over here with this dip in retained learning, there's a lot of positive learning. We do have some peaks of negative learning here, and there's some zero learning, and we're going to look at those in more detail about where those happened. Okay, so here, this table, if you look at the paper, it's more complicated than I'm presenting here. I go into the actual statistical testing in the paper, but I don't want to explain all that to you. I just want to concentrate on the results and what we got out of this. So basically, I looked at each standard and each type of learning for that standard. And I compared, in this example here, I'm looking at the decision-making standard and the retained learning. And I look at the average and I compare the average of this type of learning for this standard compared to the average of retained learning on all the other standards. So it's basically telling us, did they have more or less retained learning in this standard compared to the average of all the other standards? So they had less of the retained learning on decision making. We saw that they had a low pretest score in that area. Same with investing. They had less retained learning. They didn't know it, and so they couldn't retain what they didn't know. Okay. So here in the middle, these were the ones that they knew a lot about at the pretest. They had a lot of retained knowledge. They already knew a lot about buying goods and services, saving and credit. The problems that we see are with this negative learning and zero learning that occurred in these 2 problematic standards, the decision-making and the investing. There was more than the average of negative learning and zero learning in both of these areas. And part of that might be that it takes more than that 5-day training to incorporate this kind of information to really learn it. But those are some areas that maybe more time needs to be spent on, or something more in depth, maybe some more practice with that kind of content. Okay, so let's look at the student results. Here are the student results, and notice that my scale goes from 0 to 60 here. It doesn't go all the way to 100 because none of these results even go up to 60. Okay, on the overall test, the pre-test average was about 37, and then for the post-test, they got up to about 48. So low scores. The students did not know a lot. They did learn some. If you look at the difference from the pre-test to the post-test on every single standard, there's an increase, a big increase in some of the areas. So they started out without a lot of pre-test knowledge of personal finance, and that's not surprising to us, right? These are high school kids, maybe even some middle school kids in the sample. So I put this slide in because this is something that teachers really struggle with. Yikes, the students failed the test. I mean, they didn't even score 50%. So that's where the fact that this was a research-based study comes into play and is something that needs to be explained to teachers. The tests that are created to be used for research are developed so that you can discriminate among many different student types. And so you don't want everybody to pass the test necessarily, because you want to be able to look at different types of students and see if they are able to learn different pieces of the content. So they're typically going to be far more difficult than the test that most high school teachers would create for grading, because when you're creating a test for grading, you're testing on what you're teaching and you want to know that the students are learning it. This test has a different underlying objective. It also covered concepts introduced through all of the national standards, and none of the teachers taught all of the lessons between the pre-test and the post-test. So there was definitely going to be some stuff on the test that the high school teacher would not have put on their own test because they knew that they didn't teach it. So the idea that I'm trying to get across is that you have to interpret absolute numbers carefully with this kind of test. You can't think of it in terms of passing and failing in the traditional sense. Okay, so as a point of reference for the Mississippi students, a lot of times when you're using one of these research-based tests, there's an examiner's manual that will give you some sample results, and you can compare your results to those sample results, and it can kind of give you a gauge as to, hey, well, our results were really low, but look, they weren't. They were comparable to the sample results in the examiner's manual. So I pulled out from the examiner's manual the test creators, Wallstead and Rebeck. They tested the test on some students who had not had any personal finance training, and then some high school students who had had some personal finance training. And so those that had not had any training scored an average of 45%. And I compared that with the Mississippi students pre-test results, which was 37%. So they started out quite a bit lower in terms of financial education knowledge. After the personal finance training, the group that the test creators tested scored 52%, and the post-test results for the Mississippi students was 49%. So it's actually pretty close to that other group, which means there was a really impressive set of gains here in the knowledge, even though the actual numbers are low. These are impressive student gains for the Mississippi students, and they're particularly compelling given that Mississippi's population is disadvantaged as compared to the US as a whole. This was a point that when I was trying to get the paper published, a referee really wanted me to hit this point, because he said this is a really important finding, because Mississippi's population is more disadvantaged, and this personal finance training really had a big impact on those students. Okay, so here are the numbers for the students. These are the pre-test averages by standard, and then here's the overall pre-test average, and then the post-test, and you can see that all of the gains are statistically significant. They improved in every standard area and the overall test in a statistically significant way. Areas that were the lowest for the students were saving, financial investing, and protecting and insuring. So that's probably not that surprising in terms of these last two standards. We wouldn't expect high school students to necessarily know a lot of that. They did raise their averages in these areas, but they're still low compared to the other standards. So where did they learn more and less? Again, we're comparing by standard the different types of learning compared to that same type of learning, the average on the other standards. So we see here the problems are with these last two standards. They had less retained knowledge in investing and insuring, and then they had more of this negative learning and zero learning. They also had less retained learning and saving, but there was a lot of positive learning there. So we still have some zero learning, but we did not get the high levels of negative learning for saving. They did learn in that standard area. Here, it's more problematic with the investing and insuring. Okay, so this I just think is an interesting picture to show you the different, the disaggregated types of learning for the teachers and the students. Because look at the teachers, they had all this retained knowledge, this retained learning, and the students had very little retained learning. The largest level of learning for the students is this zero learning, which I think is interesting. I think it's interesting that they went through this education and still had a lot of zero learning. Positive was the second type of highest type of learning that happened, but it just shows us that the students need the personal finance education because they don't know a lot. Okay, so a question that came to me when I was looking at this is the learning related to the amount of the curriculum lessons teachers used? Because I thought, are the problems happening where the teachers didn't teach the students, or were the teachers teaching the students and there were still these problems? So this picture shows us, the purple is the teacher post test on this particular standard, and then the dark blue is the student post test on this particular standard, and then this light blue is a weighted average of usage of the lessons for that standard. So this is a measure that I created using results where the teachers responded to which of the lessons did they use for the different standards. And so what I want to show is that these areas where the students had problems, financial investing and protecting and insuring, these are some of the lowest levels of lesson usage. So the teachers we saw early on had some problems with these content areas, but then they also did not use the lessons for those content areas. Now, I will say that teachers could have used other materials to teach the concepts, because they also didn't use a lot of the lessons on savings, but the students did learn a lot in the savings category. So they might have been using some other materials besides those that the Fed created for that particular standard, or for any of the standards really. But it shows us that it is important to train the teachers, and it is important for the teachers to use the lessons to teach the content to the students. Okay, so now I'm back to the beginning where I showed you why you want to do program evaluation, and we will look at what we got out of it with this Mississippi project. We said one of the things you can do is measure student learning. Yes, we did that. We saw that the students knew a little bit, not a lot. They knew some stuff about buying goods and services. They knew some things about using credit. They learned some things about saving. They did not learn about financial investing and protecting and insuring. So these are useful results in terms of evaluating whether this program was successful. We also measured teacher learning. We tested the teachers. We saw that they knew a lot. They had high levels of retained learning, especially in buying goods and services and saving and using credit. They learned some. There was positive learning with decision-making and financial investing. We did not measure the teacher's success in teaching the content because we didn't have a comparison group. We can say that these teachers learned and their students learned, but we can't say that it was better than another type of teacher training program because we didn't have a comparison group to compare it to. We did also gather some information about the program and the curriculum. We had some descriptive results. I'm not going into that because I wanted to focus on this section on the learning, but we did learn that the teachers did like the curriculum. All of them said they would use it again. And there were very positive results about their experience. with the curriculum, that the program evaluation can help us make effective use of resources. Yes, we can figure out what works. We could maybe increase teacher knowledge if we spent more time in teacher training on those two standard areas of decision-making and financial investing. For the students, we might increase student knowledge with more instruction on saving, financial investing, and protecting and insuring. So how would we do that? We could either reallocate the instructional effort away from things like buying goods and services, where teachers and students already had high levels of knowledge, toward these areas where they had lower levels of knowledge, or better yet, we could spend more time on financial literacy education. We could increase instructional effort as a whole, which is, of course, very difficult to do in the school environment. Okay, effective outcomes. There's a lot of evidence in this program evaluation report about that. So you could use the visuals and the information provided in this presentation to provide information to all of these parties that I mentioned earlier. So the Mississippi program was successful at increasing knowledge for this sample of teachers and students. It is only short-term results because we were looking at this specific set of teachers and students. Of course, we need more larger scale research. We need to do some longitudinal studies following students from year to year, which is difficult to do. But we also just need more larger scale, maybe combining some states together in studies and trying to make our results more generalizable. Okay, so recommendations from the results. If you have read much of the research on effective financial education, we know pretty well that what you need to have an effective financial education program is a rigorous, well-organized plan for the teachers. You have to have high quality training, and you have to have materials that are tied to standards. I would say that this study tells us that it would also be beneficial to include an implementation plan with maybe a pacing guide that provides a minimum requirement for how much time teachers should spend on the content related to each standard. If you give the teachers a plan, as opposed to just saying, here's the curriculum, teach this, if you give them a plan that says, teach these lessons on this standard, these lessons on this standard, because we want to give teachers the flexibility of choosing. So often the curriculum has more than the teacher will have time to do if they can't do the whole thing. But if we give them some guidance on which lessons would be the most important for each standard, then maybe they would be able to cover everything. I also am a big advocate of required assessment of students, because otherwise they think it doesn't matter if they're not tested on it, and they don't take it as seriously. So more questions to consider. We have not discovered the silver bullet that says, do this and financial education is going to be successful. So what works in personal finance education? This study tells us that what the teacher already knows well and what the student has already experienced are areas where we get good results. So the question is high school too young to learn about investing and protecting and insuring? Those are areas where high school students probably don't have much experience yet. So would it be better to use resources to teach concepts that are less complex, that students might have some personal experience with? Should we not try to teach those kinds of concepts that if you're in high school, you're not thinking about, oh, I need a will. And so, should we save that stuff for later in life, and what would be the best way to do that? Or another idea is to have simulations for those things that the students don't have practical experience on, so that they can at least have some simulated experience in terms of improving learning. So I would be interested to hear what some of you have to say about what you think we should be teaching in high school. Should we be teaching all of this information, or should we limit it more to things that are less complex and more applicable to the students at that age? So that's my last slide, and thank you for listening, and I would love to hear what you guys think.
So we have a few minutes, 2 minutes exactly, if you want to get feedback live. Cindy?
Yeah.
Cindy, excellent paper. I mean, I think I love your table where you compare the disaggregated test scores with the average result, because that gives us a really good idea of where are the downfall parts or the places where people, teachers and students are both underperforming. I think we're seeing the same results. I mean, they're the same kinds of areas. And I think some of it has to do with the types of teachers. So we, one of the things that lots of times we're doing is we're importing family and consumer science teachers, for instance, who are coming to programs, and they tend to make their decisions. They tend to be kind of opinionated, and they make their decisions about what they think students need to learn. And so I was saying in the chat, which you probably didn't have a chance to see while you were presenting,
Yeah.
I was saying, they say things like, well, I don't think kids need to learn about life insurance now because they don't care. And there are a lot of things we learned in school that we don't care about, but we're prepared to be able to say, hey, I've heard about this before. I need to go get more information. So I think your paper really reflects the same kinds of results that we're also seeing with the TFL. So
Good. Thank you.
Is the TFL available for all of us that we can get access to
Yes.
it pretty easily?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can Google the title and you should be able to get a PDF or get the examiner's manual and read the examiner's manual. It tells you a lot of really good information about the test, and it has the test questions in it.
the only thing that also means, though, is be very careful about trying to administer this to people where they are able to, on their own, Google the answers as they're taking the test. So that's a really important part of this as well, is that it's kind of intended to be a classroom thing. The other really great thing with the test manual is you can compare your student or teacher results with what the norm sample is. So you can see what the average is, or with Cindy's results.
Yeah.
Yeah, the teachers were, for the purpose of what she did, they were tested in a controlled environment. The teachers were, but now that we do it virtual, they're not, I mean, but I think it's fairly, the pre-test is low stakes. The post-test, as Cindy mentioned, we still require an 80% pass rate on, but you can only control so many things.
Yeah, I've done it before where I had a system where the teachers could not see the questions and the students could only access the test. And there was a lot of pushback on that because teachers do not like to give their students tests that they do not see. I would have some teachers who would create a student account for themselves so that they could go in and look at the test. I mean, it's hard to keep that security piece in place.
And that's a little
Cindy,
disturbing, because then you think that they're trying to teach to the test.
Exactly.
Cindy, this is so great. I love seeing this. I was wondering if you, because you have the national norm, have you looked into the guessing and estimating for guessing with this?
No, I have not.
Because I think that you're going to see stronger positive learning, and you didn't have much negative learning, if I'm remembering, but your negative learning will almost go to zero. Because it's not realistic to assume people can actually negatively learn. But so I think your results will actually even strengthen a bit when you do that. So great stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy. I really do appreciate you and all this conversation. We have a short break before we reconvene for our 9:30 K-5 Econ Ed panel, which is going to be fantastic. So we want to give them a second to get set up and give everybody a moment to grab a new cup of coffee or tea and stretch. But I really do appreciate learning about the program from you and everyone here, because I think it's something that we all would love to do for our own teachers as well. So thank you for that. You can continue to talk in this environment. Feel free to talk to each other, say hello to someone that you haven't seen before. As a reminder, our schedule is all in Central Time, so we will start back at